Matt, great to have you back on the show. Welcome back to Talk Python to me.
Thanks, Michael. Been a little while. Good to be
Eh,
back.
It has been a little while. As I was entering your show details into the backend system for Talk Python to like say what episodes are coming up in what order and so on, I have to enter the guest ID into that thing. Yes, it could be a drop down list, but then there's so much scrolling. I just can't do it. So, and it's multi select. So your guest ID is 29. We first did an episode together about full stack Python when I was sitting on the couch in Stuttgart, Germany, back when I lived there. How about that?
Wow. All
Yeah,
right.
it's been a while.
All right. I feel like that's like that credibility. You have that like only a double digit guest ID.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a low double digits. Yes, it's like a pro number in racing or something. Indeed. Well, that was the past. We talked about some awesome things then. Idea of full stack Python, I believe, was a lot of the focus, but it's honestly been 10 years. I don't remember exactly what we covered in detail. However, I can tell you this is definitely not a backward looking episode. This is cutting edge stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, so much of this has changed over even 3 months. I mean, we'll talk about it all, but there's like the philosophy behind all this, the holy religious wars around what developers should be doing with it. And then
Mm-hmm.
like let's
Mm-hmm.
like dig into the details because that's like the fun stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say it's certainly one of the most controversial topics in dev space these days.
Well, it's almost like if you remember like when Django and Ruby on Rails came out, and they were like the new frameworks, even before like all the JavaScript frameworks and everything like that. It was like back end server side code, and you could do so much more. I remember this was back when I was an early professional developer. I was working in Java with servlets in a framework called Tapestry, and everything was so hard to do. And they tried to add so many layers of abstraction. It was like peak
Mm-hmm.
enterprise Java
How many
development.
layers of dependency injection were at
Oh
play?
yeah. And so then I would go home at night and I'm like learning Django and I was like, I can't believe how much more I can get done in an hour than I did 8, 9, 10 hours a day working in the Java code. Not because there's literally nothing wrong with Java, but it was just that the frameworks were so well built for what we were trying to do. So that's the only parallel I personally have to like what is happening right now, and this is like 10x, 100x of what that is. It's like if you use the tools properly for the right purposes at the right time period, because like a year ago versus today is very different, you can be wildly more productive. There's also
Yes.
the downsides, but there is substantial improvement to be had in certain areas of software development, and I feel like that is actually really the big takeaway. Among all the hype, break everything out. It's like there's tactical things you can use this agentic tools for, LLMs that will 10x, 100x certain things that are super annoying about software development right now in
Yes.
a way that was previously impossible.
Right. Summarize my architecture. Have you tried that compared to like I
Yeah,
have 100,000 lines of code and I've got to like study the crap out of it just to figure out what piece connects to what?
I
You
love
know.
the roast my code. Like,
Okay.
don't just tell me about it. Like, give it to me straight here. Like, how could this function be improved? Roast it. Okay. Now tell
Yeah.
me how I can improve it. Okay.
And at the end, just give me a little bit of like ego boost because I need it after all the roasting.
Yes, exactly.
Put that in
Well,
your
it's like,
cursor
okay,
rules
you
file.
roasted
Anytime
me.
you
Now,
talk me down, just include a little spirit lifting comment as well.
well, the best part is like, okay, roast me. Okay, if you're so smart, go fix it for me.
Yeah, you're like, oh,
And
that's
it will.
right. It did work. Sometimes it does actually,
Sometimes. Sometimes.
which is insane. Yeah, I think probably the best way I could say we should frame people should frame this conversation to at least to get started with in their mind is a balanced take, right? It's not necessarily vibe coding, while that's hilarious and has spawned many amazing YouTube videos, right? But it's also it doesn't necessarily make sense to imagine that these tools don't exist and
Yeah.
just out of principle say, well, I'm never going to touch them because I'm not going to replace coders with this. Like, it's like
Yeah.
saying, I was just playing a bunch with Rough, the formatting tool, right? And it's ripping through 500 files at a time on these projects I'm working on. Rough format, rough fix, rough check fix, bam, 37 files repaired. I could have done that by hand and flexed my dev skills, but should I? No, of course I shouldn't. It takes
Would that be the
microseconds.
best use of your time?
It certainly does not. And so if these tools exist, well, then I think it comes down to like, well, what is the right way to use them? How do they go well? How do they go poorly?
Yeah.
Are they too expensive?
That's spot on. I mean, what I find fascinating about this shift is like most professional developers have spent their entire adult lives just like learning new technologies. I actually don't know why this is any different. Like the whole
Yeah.
point of being a developer is like keeping an open mind and open philosophy of like, what can I learn? How should I be learning? Just that is what appeals to me so much about being a software developer is like this mindset of I go into this year not even knowing what tools I may be using by the end of the year because they may not exist yet. And I want to go learn them. And some
Yeah.
of them I am going to throw immediately in the wastebasket, and other ones are going to stick with me for potentially decades. And in fact, like I had when it comes to LLMs, like I had put out like a post on X, and I was like, I feel like Olama is one of those tools that I've added to my tool belt, like Django or Vim or Tmux, that will be with me potentially for a couple of decades because it is just so straightforward and it makes it so easy to use these open weighted models. And so that's incredible. 18 months ago, I hadn't even heard of this tool, and it actually it didn't exist before, I don't know, 18, 24 months ago. And here's something that I'm like, wow, this is going to stick with me. So I think that's what's maybe getting lost in a little bit of the like hype cycle is like, we're developers, like all we do is learn new stuff. Why is this any different from learning an open source project that you just found on GitHub?
100%. 100%. I'm definitely here with you on that. I see in other areas like education, I see it, like write this essay for me. That's very problematic if you're in 10th grade and you're supposed to learn how to write an essay. But your job is to create software that works, add features, make it awesome. Like there's not a test.
Yeah. Well, and I think
other than shipping.
Anyone who's used these tools, if you are legitimately using them to build software, you will definitely not be at all concerned of software development jobs going away. Like there's so many things that these tools do not do right. And unless you are an experienced software developer and understand those nuances, you can very quickly get into that. I don't know if they call it like the wall of despair, or there's different pit of despair, like phrases that people have had where like you're kind of building something and all of a sudden the LLM goes in a direction. If you're not a senior enough developer, you're not experienced enough, or you're not willing to dig deep enough, you suddenly are stopped. There's nothing you can do from there. You're like, no, fix it. It doesn't matter how many times you tell the LLM to fix it or the tool to
fix it, please, or you go to jail.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, there's people on the train tracks. You must fix this right now.
Exactly. My grandma's life depends upon it.
Right.
You got to make this database query work.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing that maybe is preventing people from embracing some of this stuff is I actually don't even think that a lot of the terminology is clear. So if you'll allow me to be pedantic for a minute, I actually think that this is often the most insightful thing that I work with people on or tell people about, which is just like, what is the difference between an AI model, an LLM, an AI agent, and some of these other things? Because actually people use these interchangeably. People will say Gen AI, generative AI, when they mean an agent or vice versa, or an LLM. Like these are not drop and replace terminology for each other. They have very specific meanings. And I think particularly when I've seen like kind of the traditional software companies try to all of a sudden AI all the things, this is part of why developers get so annoyed with the AI ecosystem, because it's like saying, Django is you wouldn't say web framework, you would say like, oh, it's an AI agent coding tool. It's like, no, it's not. What are you talking about? Immediately
Exactly.
you lose your credibility, right? So
It's a AI generative web framework builder.
right. Right. Thank goodness it's not. Thank goodness Django, the creators and the maintainers know what they're good at, and they're they're not trying to be a part of the hype cycle. But maybe
Ironically, I think Simon Wilson, one of the original Django folks, is
that's
one
right.
of the leading people in
Absolutely.
AI
I've learned so
and
much
sort
from
of,
him, from his writing.
yeah,
He's
absolutely. That's
unreal.
amazing. But
I
he
actually
didn't
am.
think that, go ahead.
Yeah. I don't know how. I don't understand how he can be so prolific. He's incredible. Like he's just
Yeah.
like a true gift to
Yeah.
software development, having been on the leading edge of so many things. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I could just lay out real quick, maybe for folks, like an AI model. Was an AI model is typically when people are talking about that. Now, again, like there can be a little bit of nuance and gray areas with some of these definitions, but typically an AI model is something that is trained on some sort of like training set. And it's been typically trained on the transformer architecture, which is a fairly recent, last 8 years kind of development. And so this is really what's allowed the breakthrough when we talk about AI now versus AI, a couple decades ago when it was like complete AI winter and no one wanted to talk about it. Is we've had this breakthrough in architecture, and it's not just like one breakthrough. It is a tremendous number of breakthroughs around attention and the way that things are weighted and things like that. But essentially, like to boil that down, is like you have these AI models. Now, an AI model is not equivalent to a large language model, an LLM. An LLM is one type of AI model. So when I was at Assembly AI, like they were training, or they are training, state of the art speech to text models is not an LLM. So a lot of times people will say like AI model LLM, but those are not equivalent. An AI model is a superset of the subset, which is like an LLM, which is one type of, typically working on text modality. Although there are things called multimodal models, which can have different image inputs and image outputs and text inputs, text outputs, and stuff like that. But I think that's one thing where a lot of companies and maybe even developers who are like learning about the space get confused, is like, is an AI model and LLM are the exact same thing? Like, no, there's a relationship there, but they're not the same. So then you have like generative AI, which a lot of companies just kind of like sprinkle that into everything that they talk about. It's like generative AI is really using AI models, typically LLMs, but also image generation and some other forms to create some sort of output. So it's the generative component of it. So you have some sort of input, and then there's a non-deterministic set of outputs that come out the other side. So it'll be, for example, like draw me a red dragon breathing fire for the image generation. And that generative AI is like basically using an AI model to produce that image out the other side. So those are some of the common terms. And then you have AI agents, which is a lot of like what we talk about, or we're going to talk about, which is it is using typically an LLM, but it's typically using some sort of AI model. And that is kind of, almost think about it as like the core. There's inputs into the system and non-deterministic outputs that come out the other side. So you'll say something like, write me a bunch of unit tests, and in Claude Code or in Cursor or in Windsurf, and then it will interpret those inputs and then produce code or some sort of output out the other side. So I think for developers who are trying to get into, how do I even understand kind of the AI space, it's actually really important to get that terminology correct, because otherwise, you won't even know when you're reading, like, particularly for companies or people that aren't as familiar with the space, like what they're even talking about. So I always like to
because
kind
a
of like
lot of the
frame that
companies,
conversation.
their job, it's to their benefit to obscure and make
Yeah.
it just seem like it's the
Yeah. They want to
everything
seem like
machine. Yeah.
totally. There's financial incentives by some companies to like obscure what they're doing and make it seem much more complicated so that they can sell this solution. Oh, it takes this really complicated problem and streamlines it down to like some sort of simple solution. And that's like often not the case. Like when you peel it back as a developer, you're like, you're not really doing that, right? So
Right.
I think that's often where I think a lot of developers get frustrated with the current state of the industry, because you're like, no, that's not what you're doing. Like you're not doing generative AI, or you're not doing actual agents, because agents are, and then there's like autonomous agents, which are like operating independently. So that's one thing I think developers can like take away from the conversation, is just like, is the company accurately describing what they are doing?
Yeah. I 100% agree. And let me do a little sidebar rant, and I'd love to get your thoughts on
Yeah.
this. Okay, yeah. So when I hear people say, "I've tried AI, it's a bunch of AI slop. It just makes up a bunch of mistakes," I I I notice a couple of things that are often the case when I hear those, and have people avoid that, right? So one, a lot of times I feel like people are not getting the best experience. They say like, I tried this, it really wasn't for me. It just messes up more than it provides. They're using the cheapest free models that they can find, right? If you use, you know, Claude's Opus model versus some free model, like a 3 billion parameter local model, they're not even in the same category. The type of
Yeah.
accuracy and like insight and like the context, do they understand everything rather than, well, they only understand the last file they read. Like that is like one half of the problem. And then I think the other, for people who are not being successful yet with this kind of stuff, it has to do with not providing enough information and context and stuff in the prompt. So I'll see like, oh, refactor this function. It's like, well, hold on. Where do you even want it to go, right? It's just going to like start randomly doing stuff. Here's a function. It is similar to these, and I need to move this to this kind of design pattern, keeping in mind that I'm using this ORM, and like give it like the same amount of description you would to a junior developer who's not super familiar with your project. So you want to give that thing like possibly a multi-page write-up of what it needs to do, and then ask it to plan it out and then start working through the plan, not just refactor to be, to do this or whatever. And I think those two things are both problems. They often go together because the cheaper models can't accept that kind of information and keep it working, right?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I mean, I totally agree. I think also too, like these models, you cannot just like mix and match and replace things. So like you may have an experience with one model, and also recognize that these models, even though Claude for Opus is the public name of that model, they are tweaking and tuning that model in the back end to figure out how they can more maybe not profitably, but serve this model up at scale in a window of resources. So even within a given model, unless it is an open weighted model that you've downloaded and you have under complete control, these models are changing over time.
Absolutely.
So this is like I think that's actually been one of the most concerning parts for me as a developer. I was like, what if I rely on a tool
Right.
and it changes, and I
Yeah,
wake
the
up one
tests
day
passed last
and
week. They don't pass this week. I have no control or visibility.
right,
Yeah.
I was productive last week, or I was productive yesterday, and I can no longer be productive today. And that's setting aside even downtime or API stuff, right? So I think the thing is like that's why I very much appreciate like sort of the vibe check, the whole concept of a vibe check, which is like you get a new model or get access to a new API, and like what are the individual components that you want to test. So like even to your example of like refactor, here's the ORM, that sort of thing. I started when I have a model, and I use a lot of Claude Code. I use a lot of Opus and Sonnet now, but I'm sure this will evolve. I would love to try it with some open weighted models soon. And I will say something like in this urls.py, because I work a lot with Django on the back end. I'll say update just I'm trying to add a new page. It's going to be at this route. Here is the please update the urls.py file for me, and like here's roughly what I expect, right? Super specific. And if it can't even get that part right, the chances of you saying, okay, now build a new page, now build a new view, now do X, Y, and Z are very small. So you kind of have like the smallest unit that you would work with and then start building up. And it is a two-way street. Like you have to build confidence in that model over time. Like what are its true capabilities? And I will say like, it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of work being a software developer and learning a new open source project. So it's actually not that different from just like, okay, pip install, new library, reading the documentation, all those things. Like, but it's a different format of like going back and forth with the computer.
I think it encourages people to be less serious because it feels like a little little chat, little back and forth. Just, hey, I just asked a
Yeah.
little question. It came with a cool answer. It doesn't speak. You need to study this, and you need to like really. This is a
Yeah.
skill. It's like I'm having just a chat with like, someone or whatever.
Well, it does. I mean, it does open up, even if you set aside code generation, it opens up new capabilities that I would argue are useful for every single developer, regardless of how senior you are. So just being able to run Claude and in plan mode, ask it questions about like where might I have you know security vulnerabilities in my code, or
Yes.
where could I refactor database queries in order to compress the number of database queries within this view, or where could I add caching that would be most impactful, and don't even have it touch your code other than to read the code. Like that was actually like my big kind of breakthrough with LLMs was I was like, I'm just going to use them in read-only mode. I don't need them to modify my code for me. I'm comfortable doing that myself as a developer. But once I got confident in the models being able to read the code, I was kind of like, just like dip my toe in the water, like maybe
Yeah.
modifying some things. And especially in Python, I've read a lot of scripts. I'm like updating data, and I don't know. It's not my favorite part of coding. So
No.
having models that can write the script for me, even if it's not perfect, and then I can go modify it.
I need to export this from the database in that
Yeah,
format, and like, if it works at
exactly.
all, it's perfect. If it's not going to work at all, right? Like, it's a low
Yeah.
risk.
Yeah, and an export from a database is as long as you're not like accidentally dropping a table, it is just like a read-only kind of like tell me about my code, right? Like there's all these things out there that in software development are like you have to do the analysis yourself, but if you can shortcut it with an LLM, that actually seems like a big win to me. And I don't actually see any downside to doing that. Like if
Yeah.
it's a read only and you're not touching the code, that to me feels like only a win. It's time that I have saved that otherwise I would have to invest myself.
Yeah, let me give people an example of something I recently did, and I want to kind of tie this back to like really emphasize the agentic side of things. So I just checked. I have 530 GitHub repositories on my hard drive. I have 3 computers. I have like this streaming course live recording computer that we're talking on now. There's a M2 Mac Mini. I have an M4 Mac Mini, which I usually work on, but I also have my laptop. And so every now and then, usually I'm on top of things, but every now and then I'll open up a project and I'll start making changes. I'm like, oh, I forgot to do git pull. Oh no. Oh, this might be bad, especially if it's like a binary file, like a PowerPoint that I'm going to use for a course. It's like, there's no fixing it, right? You just put them side by side and rename one and copy it over. It's not great. And so I was sitting at my kitchen table on my laptop and about to take my daughter to school. And I opened up Cursor with Cloud Sonnet in agentic mode. And I described what I want. I said, what I would like is for you to create a script that I can run as a single command that will recursively find all the Git repositories in a certain, whatever folder I'm in, downward, find that, do a git pull on every single one of them, and report out which ones have changed. I hit enter, drove my daughter to school, which is 5 minutes one way, 5 minutes back. Sit down. The thing was there. It had created little test directories. It ran it. It said, it looks like it's totally good. And I literally just now have that as a utility. I can just, when I sit down, I'm like, oh, it's been like a week since I worked on this computer. Just git refresh and just give it a moment, and then boom, you can see a report of all the stuff that's changed across all the parts. Even on something amazing as like ChatGPT, you don't get that because it's not agentic. So maybe like that's a long-winded way of like saying, tell us about the magic of like what is this agent and tool using aspect for, because I think when I said my rant that it's not working for people, I think a lot of times people are not doing agentic AI. They're asking LLM to write functions or stuff, which is great, but it's not the same.
Yeah. Well, I think I would say like kind of the biggest thing, and I mean, there's multiple attributes to it. Like again, going back to some of the definitions, it's like you have an LLM, and that LLM, if it's running through ChatGPT on your web browser, it's not going to have access to all the stuff in your code base unless like you know, you have a public GitHub repository or something. But generally, when you're working in your local development environment, it's not going to have access to that stuff unless you like. There are, to be fair, there are some tools that will take like enough context and like upload it to ChatGPT. But again, like what you're starting to do
Yeah.
is you're starting to get really far away from a natural workflow and into one in which you have to bend to how the LLM is set up. So to me, I think the simplest way that I would look at it is like Agentic is like it's something that is running side by side with you. It's almost like, I don't want to say Copilot because Copilot has overloaded the terms with like
Yeah.
kind of GitHub Copilot, but it is essentially like, think about it almost as like pair programming with like more junior developers. Other people have used that analogy. It's not perfect, but it's kind of the one that I have that kind of
It's
sticks
as
with
close
me,
as we
which is
got, I think,
it's as
honestly. Like
close as we've
you
got,
can
right?
tell it to go do stuff, and it's not
Yeah,
just gonna
yeah,
only read it. It'll look around, it'll experiment, it'll try something, it'll see it's wrong,
yeah,
it'll try something. Like it's kind of
yeah.
independent.
And I think the easiest one for a lot of folks to have tried, because it was the one that I frankly like got the most comfortable with at first, was in Cursor. You know, you have VS, which is essentially VS Code. So, you know, Cursor is like embedded within that. And then you have different ways of interacting with like an agent mode where you're just asking it to do stuff, right? Like so asking it stuff about the code base or please to write this function, whatever it is. So I do think that like that works for some folks. For me, it was not kind of the light bulb moment. It was kind of like where I started initially using it was I would, if I was like, oh, I need to like use this new API or I need to like kind of like develop a script or whatever it is. It was kind of like because I don't normally work in VS Code. I'm like a Vim, Tmux, like for a long time. Like that's kind of my natural environment. And I was never going to like kind of adapt my own workflow. And I think a lot of people are like that, right? Like you're in
Yeah.
JetBrains or you're in
Yeah.
Xcode or whatever it is. You don't, what there's the breakthrough for you is like to build it in a way to your work, your development workflow that just is natural. And I think that's kind of not the canonical definition, but to me is kind of most
Yeah.
representative of kind of like agentic programming is like it's just completely a part of your workflow and you don't have to adapt. So so again, like that cursor mode is kind of like, okay, I'd use it for like one-off stuff. For me, the breakthrough was using Claude Code. And I'll actually, instead of talking about Claude Code, I'll say, here was the bet that I made. My feeling was there was enough value from Claude Code based off of the videos that I've been watching, what I've been reading, and a lot of folks have been using it, that I was like, I'm a little worried about getting too reliant upon this tool, which is an API. And I will give Anthropic like a lot of credit. They have done a lot of good work on these models. But I've also used Anthropic stuff in the past, which either had bad uptime or they were changing the model too frequently on the backside or things like that, that I was like, I was worried. And I think that's like a natural thing as a software developer. Like, should I really use this API? So I was like, my bet was, okay, even if I use this and it's amazing, if it goes away, I still need to be comfortable just like moving back to my workflow, or there could be open weighted models in the future. Like I can just run Olama and I could run either Claude Code or some sort or open code or some sort of CLI that would allow me to just do the same things, right? May not exactly, but roughly the same things. So that was kind of the bet that I made. That was like the philosophical like mindset shift for myself was I'm already very comfortable as a software developer. Let me add this in a way that doesn't break my coding workflow. I'm not adapting to these tools in a way that is like unnatural. And then I will use them in ways that I feel like are actually going to be productive as opposed to forcing them to be used in ways that like almost like the all the hype cycle and the news media is talking about, like you will never write another line of code again. Like
Right.
I don't
Right.
actually
Right.
really believe that is true. Like I don't know. I feel like anybody who's saying that is not actually using these tools. And I actually don't think it's going that direction. So I don't know. That kind of sets the stage rather than like how I use the tools, like what was going through my mind as an experienced software developer of like, should I even make this shift? I don't know if you had to undergo that as well.
I did, and yeah, I guess I haven't I've been as introspective about it as you, but for me, the real shift for me was I'm already a good coder. I feel very competent flying around. Our tool chain, I know yours and mine is like kind of quite different, right? You're very Tmux based. I'm very much often in PyCharm, jumping around there, but we all are very fluid and capable, right? So you're feeling like this is like I'm really productive and competent. And the last thing I want to do is just like spend my days in a chat engine. You know what I
Right.
mean? Right.
Right.
Like that is not it. And I guess one of the main things, I sat down with a friend of mine. We were out having beer and he had his laptop, a friend named Mark, and he had his laptop as well. Man, I've been doing some really cool stuff with Agentic AI. Let's just do an example. And over like a beer, we built the most amazing app that would literally take weeks or a week at least, knowing what you're doing. Like not I'm going to learn these frameworks and then do it, but even with and
Okay.
like that
But
actually
I have to
changes my
ask,
perspective. Go
did
ahead.
it use open source libraries and frameworks in order to create, like, did the tool pull in a bunch of stuff and it actually stood up and built this application
Yes.
off of all the open source code, right?
Yes. And it was ridiculous. It was a
Yes.
fast API app using SQL Alchemy to talk to SQLite. The web design was done in Bulma CSS. It used simple MDE for live markdown editing, and it kept going. And one of the things I think is really interesting, and I know you have some thoughts on this as well, is it's the more you work with like new fancy hip frameworks, the less well off you are, right? Like I could have said Tailwind, but Tailwind's got all these build steps and all these little nuances. Bulma is just include a CSS. And so it didn't have, that was like a thing it didn't have to worry about and so on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Well,
I find it's like, I find myself trending towards more simple code than more towards frameworks, which is the opposite. I think the trend's
yeah.
been
Well,
going.
I'll even take it a step further, which is I very much appreciate. I agree with you on the like less build steps. In fact, like the simpler is often better. But I will say that I very much appreciate the opinionated tools and frameworks, and that's why I've actually had a better experience doing using like Claude Code with Django. And a big piece is also I've written thousands, if not tens of thousands of lines of code already in Plushcap, which is typically what I'm, building, if not some side scripts and stuff like that. And
Yeah,
I will have,
let's do a really quick sidebar and
yeah,
let you introduce
sure.
those projects. Just because
Okay.
I know it's really nice
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be able to like reference back and say when I was adding this feature or this is so give people something
sure.
concrete. Like
Well,
tell
this
us
is,
about full stack Python and
yeah.
Plushcap.
So this is full stack Python. I wrote full stack Python. It's like over 150,000 words, all about the Python ecosystem, ranging from like the Python language itself to web frameworks to deployment options and content delivery networks, APIs. So it's kind of like all the things around Python, and it was broken down by conceptual ideas, so like data visualization, and then implementations, which I feel like is something that is not particularly obvious to people that are learning to program. Is like you have conceptual ideas, and those have specific implementations. So a web framework is a conceptual idea across many different programming languages, but the specific implementations, like a Ruby on Rails, like Rails the framework, or Django the framework, are the specific implementations within those programming ecosystems. And so that's essentially how I built out this site over 10 years. I will say that like I only really work on one side project at a time. And full stack Python, I felt like kind of run its course over 10 years. So I really haven't updated it in a few years. I still think it's actually relevant for most of it, but it's some of the links are a little bit dated and things like that. And it's very much not it's not been brought into kind of this the conversation that we're having around like coding agents and things like that. It is still relevant, but I would say not as relevant as it was when I was updating it literally every day.
Right, back in 2016 or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. And I struggle a little bit because like I would love to go back to working on full stack Python, but what I struggle with is you can ask LLMs about all of this stuff and it will give you very good answers. And so a lot of what I was doing was just bringing like as an experienced software developer, like writing almost like essays on like, you can see here, like, why are web frameworks useful? You can ask an LLM like why web frameworks are useful, and actually it'll probably give you a better answer than what I've written here, because it's going to incorporate tons of different sources. So that's where I've struggled a little bit with, like, as the chat models based on LLMs, especially as they've added search, have gotten better. I'm not really sure how to add enough value on top of what an LLM can tell you to justify like a substantial investment in like writing. And then also, like, the one challenge with full stack Python is it's a statically generated site. It is primarily Markdown, built with Pelican, which is a great static site generator in Python, but it was a lot of writing, and it wasn't as much code as I wanted. Like, it's like the site is kind of the site, and then you add a ton of content to it. To me, I really wanted to get back to, like, especially as like now, as a VP for the last several years of my career, an executive level, like, I don't get a lot of time day in and day out to code. And so I really wanted something that I was coding every single day on nights and weekends and just doing in my spare time. So that's kind of where I shifted to this project, Plushcap, which is at plushcap.com. So this is like a landscape of developer-focused companies with self-service motions. So the hypothesis behind this was, like, when I was at Twilio, we were tracking like developer content and events and other competitors, and it wasn't back then, but now YouTube is a really important source for teaching developers. And so I wanted just like to aggregate a lot of this data. So that's what I've done. It's essentially 500 developer-focused companies across all different stages, from like pre-seed all the way to publicly traded companies, where they stand kind of in their competitive position, and then like leaderboards that will show you like how many videos and views and subscribers do different companies have. And so like there's just a lot of data analysis, a lot of data visualization, a lot that essentially just goes into like if you scroll down on Airbyte and you go down to on this page, if you scroll down to the website structure and click on the blog, if you go back and just click on the
hold on
blog, or just go up a little bit, the blog post.
Gotcha. I see.
Under content category, this lays out the number of blog posts that was published per month by the company. And so just being able to visualize like their content patterns and trends is like been helpful for me to, as I like talk to companies about their go-to-market motions with developers and developer marketing, things like that. So anyway, this is like, it's a Django project running on DigitalOcean, Cloudflare as a CDN, a ton of Python, ton of database stuff on the back end. So for me, like, I just love digging into this, and I use like coding agents, and they really greatly accelerated what I can actually do with this, because what I'll do is I'm in meetings all day. So in the start of the day, I'll just tee up like a bunch of stuff that I want to get done. And then throughout the day, as I'm like getting out of meetings, I can just hit like, okay, like good. And I just run it all my, my own computer. And then I've got my work computer, got my own computer where I'm like running all this stuff. And like periodically when I'm taking a break, I'm be like, okay, yep, that looks good. Or no, I don't do that thing, right? So to me, it is like having a development team, even just a small development team, because I'm not doing like huge stuff, to actually like implement things. So that's really where I use all these tools. And I have an established code base. I wrote the code base myself over 3 years by hand. So now I have all the design patterns. I have an opinionated framework with Django. I've already chosen the vast majority of the open source libraries that I need. And it is mostly about the coding tools, pattern matching against what I've already done to create a new visualization or to create a new scraper, because like I'll scrape all the content from all these sites. So if I add a new company in the database, I have to write some custom web scrapers in order to get all their data. And that stuff is annoying. I've already written hundreds of those. So I'd rather
you're done right now.
and then out the other side comes something that I can actually use. And I don't have to do all like the grunt work, because I've like done a lot of that myself.
Yeah, there's no more lessons to learn by making you
figure
out their nav structure.
Yeah, or like, I'm pulling like which CSS class corresponds to like the author name of the blog post, so that I can get some structured data out of what is otherwise like unstructured data, because it's every single company has a different blog blog format, right? So
Yeah, I think this you touched on two really interesting things here. First, well, three, I guess. One, Plushcap is super cool.
nice.
Yeah. Two, having a low stakes project that you can just kind of go mad on with agentic AI, and it's not
Yes.
going to end things or end badly. And three, I think this is really interesting, and I've noticed the same trends for me as well. But having already created the project, having really carefully thought about design structures, like, okay, it's going to be in this folder structure, and it's going to follow this design pattern over and over using these three libraries I like, not the most popular ones necessarily, but the ones that I think I want to work with. Putting that
Yeah.
in place really limits the, oh, it just, why is it using NPM? This is a Python project. What is it up to? You know, like it's way more focused and more likely to be aligned with what you were hoping it would do in the first place.
And you need to choose the tools that you can debug the best. And so for me, like this is a Bootstrap front end. There's a framework called Tabler, which is built kind of on top of Bootstrap, which makes it even easier to build kind of these admin style interfaces and pulls in, I think it's Chart.js, Apex, it might be Apex. I was using a few different charting frameworks. So it might be like Apex or something now, but the whole point of like choosing your tools and being opinionated about your tools, I think actually helps a lot, because then you don't have to get up to speed on the framework or the library before you debug the problem that the LLM created. Because the LLMs are typically they're going to get you often 95% of the way there, and you can keep prompting them, but it's often better to just like go fix it yourself. There might be like a one-line tweak or something like that that you need to do, as opposed to like trying to get it to like, sometimes it feels like getting the last like 5 to 10% of polish is like finding a needle in the haystack, because it's changing too much often. Whereas if you can just go in and modify it yourself, you're not going to introduce additional noise into the development process.
Yeah. I have what seems like an out of left field question, but it's not.
Yeah.
What about Git and source control when using agentic AI?
So, I mean, that's the thing that we haven't talked about, which is like wildly important, which is like when I'm letting something run, it is off of it's either in a separate Git branch if I'm running a bunch of things, or I actually like, granted, I have some simplifying assumptions with my own code base. I've split the code base into multiple parts. So I have like scripts where the scripts are like, web scrapers. And if I'm updating things through an API, like I use the YouTube API, I use like the PyPy API. I use like a bunch of different APIs to get data into the database. So like I can have an agent running on that thing, right? And that's separate. I actually only have those things interface with an API that is running with Django REST framework with the main production application database. So I've created a layer of abstraction where I can have an agent running on this thing over here. Then I can also have it running on the main application code base. And as long as we're not changing anything about the API, then I know that like they can make their changes separately and they're not going to interfere with each other, right? And all of this, going back to your original question about Git, I'm constantly like just doing git add, git commit, right? The one thing I've definitely noticed about some of these tools is they will go off and create, a bunch of different files. And so you do have to get pretty careful with like, I used to just do, git commit all the things, git commit dot, or no, sorry, git add dot, git commit with a little message. And I've learned like, oh, geez, like there's some debugging files that it actually didn't remove. I got to like manually remove those. Now, again, like I think a lot of these tools, you can configure them to like get rid of those problems. I think that that's the thing that's really improving quickly now. So if you ask me like, what's the thing now that's really annoying that will likely be much easier a year from now, it will be like, you're going to have a standard like claude.md file that gives instructions that's just going to be like standardized. It's like how everybody has a git ignore file. Like you just kind of copy it from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And then you modify it a little bit, but like the vast majority of it's the same.
Yeah.
Like that's where we're going to go, right?
Right. right? You're like, this, we've all tended towards this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
So, so,
that goes
so
back to my, you're not prompting enough sort of things, right? Like if you're opinionated about how your project is built, put that in there. And a lot of
yes.
times these agentic tools have like a rules file, like Cursor has
Yes.
a .cursor rules. And the stuff you might put in there is, my preferred web framework is Fast API. When you install things or create a virtual environment, use UV, not
Yeah.
Python's native, right? And you'll see it when it's working. It'll say things like, I know that I'm supposed to use UV, so it'll run UV pip list when it's checking if something got installed right, and it'll
Yeah.
even like sort of remind itself from what you've said, and it's those kind of things that keeps it on track, right? So I
Yeah.
would say one of the things people should actually put more effort into than maybe they initially think is like setting up these rules about just your general preferences.
Yes, and I think it was Armin Roenicker had a really great tip the other day where essentially like you can just use, I believe it's a hook in Claude Code, and it's like basically if the LLM tries to use pip install something, it will actually throw an error, and it will know based off of that error that it should be using UV. And so you can add enough of these hooks, and so like what I anticipate is like over time, number one, like people will develop some level of standardization for these. Like right now, the configuration files are very fragmented across the different agentic tools, so you can't quickly swap from like one to the other. Like I know like there's a Gemini CLI and there's a Claude. Claude that has a configuration both for project specific and for all your development workspaces. My guess is like a lot of this stuff will start to get standardized, just like MCP was standardized and an open standard, and then it will make it much easier for people to like just transpose their development preferences from one tool to the other. So my guess is like that's probably what's coming over the next 12 to 18 months. And if the big companies don't want that to happen, they'll be left behind by the open source tools that will make that much easier. Um,
Yeah.
I think the other thing is like I actually don't I don't know. Maybe I'm like one of the oddballs with Vim. I have a Vim RC like for my configuration. I don't have like an insane number of extensions or, or I guess plugins or like a huge Vim RC or anything like that. Like I actually try to keep things relatively standard, and then just focus on the patterns that are most important or the configurations that are most important. And I'm still kind of like that with using Claude Code. I do have Claude MD file and stuff, but I also found that it's not 100% accurate, and so I think there's going to be a lot of development around making sure that like the tools adhere to the practices that you really want. Because right now, I feel like if you want reliability in like code formatting, you need to run the code formatter like as a separate step as a part of your build workflow. Like
Yeah.
the agentic tools are just not. I haven't. Maybe I'm not doing
I've
it right.
got
I
I've
haven't found them
gotten
reliable enough.
I've gotten Cloud Sonnet to know that it's supposed to run rough format and rough check dash dash fix
Yeah.
whenever it finishes anything. And so
Okay.
it'll at the end it'll say, and now I'm supposed to do, this to make sure it's
Yeah.
tidy and like the style you like according to your rough toml, right?
Yeah. And that makes sense. I mean,
But
I think.
it's
Yeah.
not, sometimes it doesn't, right? And you're like, well,
Right.
but you usually do. What's wrong with you?
I know. Yeah. And also I feel like everything that you add to the agent, like the more and more steps that you add, actually like again, like this will change over time, but I feel like it actually gets less reliable. And also like the number of steps, I would rather just have it run a script that will handle all those things before I'm ready to commit, rather than having it run all the time. Because I've also found that like sometimes I want to add a tool for like code formatting or something, and then it slows down the whole process too much for me. And then the main thing with these tools is I want them to be extremely fast. And that is probably the biggest piece of advice I can give to like any of these companies is like why Claude Code over others? Like it is insanely fast. Even though the LLMs require, processing time and stuff, like it's responsive. And so like my guess is like that's also where a lot of the open source tools will go as well. They'll just be really fast and responsive, just like Vim and Tmux are.
Yeah. Leave it to a Vim user to say it's not fast enough. Just kidding. Yeah, exactly. So I think maybe just like some quick shout outs to some of the tools, right? So Claude Code obviously is a really interesting one. You've been talking about that a lot. I've mentioned Cursor a few times. I think as much as I'm I'm much more a fan of the PyCharm style. I find it to be very effective. I've done some stuff with Junie, which is kind of a new project from JetBrains. Like JetBrains has had an AI agent that was kind of like a super duper autocompleter. And maybe we could talk about that difference as
Yeah.
well. But it's like a super duper autocompleter. But then they have a separate, completely different install thing that is an agentic AI called Junie. And I think it's making good steps. It like really integrates with PyCharm if you're into that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and
like
that's been the evolution, right? Like we had
yeah,
GitHub Copilot, which was essentially like a very fancy autocomplete. It would complete your code for you, but it wasn't an agent in any meaningful capacity. Like that's what kind of kicked off some of this stuff of like, wow, it's really great autocomplete. And I think a lot of the
yeah,
tools followed that pattern. Like even when you would use Cursor, like say a year ago, it was very much like autocomplete,
yeah,
at least the standard pattern, right? Before they had
yeah,
the agent mode.
for sure. And that never really connected with me. I'm
Yeah,
like,
right.
I don't need that. I can autocomplete it word by word. I
Yes,
don't really, because half the time it'll autocomplete like 3 or 4 lines. I'm like, yes, but not that line. And how do I get it to autocomplete the next?
yeah,
I guess I got to accept it, then go edit that part. You know, like it's just, I never
right.
really vibed with that. But the agentic mode, that is next level stuff. Also, if you're a PyCharm or VS Code user, the Cloud Code integrates in both of them, right?
Yes.
Like you know, it's so maybe talk like I know you're using Claude Code, so maybe tell people like what it's like and why you
Yeah.
like that one.
Okay, so I started using Claude Code like 6 months ago, but I was using it off of the API credits, which was before like they came out with the plans. Started evaluating it. I was like, this is going to be way too expensive. Like this is
Yes,
going to
it is
cost
very
me.
expensive very soon.
I was like, based off of my usage patterns, like just like monthly, it's probably going to cost me over $1,000 a month. I was like, this is just not, it's not worth that, right? So then they came out with the max plan, which was I think originally $200 a month. Now they have $100 and $200 a month, which I thought was interesting, right? But I was like, I talked to enough people that did use it, and I was like, that's interesting, but I'm not that comfortable with this workflow yet. They came out with the pro plan, which was $20 a month. They said, okay, I'll try it for a month. It was almost like to me, it was almost like a free trial. Like I'm willing to invest $20 into a course or whatever it is. Like 200
Yeah.
is like a pretty high bar, but $20, I was like, yeah, okay, fine. Even if this sucks, I'll try it. So I maxed out the pro plan. I was like, I'm gonna get every drop out of the pro plan that I possibly can for my $20, and then I'll make a decision as to whether I want to upgrade or not. I was like, this is good enough. And that was only with the Sonnet model. It wasn't the higher Opus model. So there's like a lot of stuff that was like a little bit more limiting about it. If you give a lot more instructions, it wasn't as good as like architecting things, but I got enough out of it. I was like, okay, I'd be willing to like upgrade. And so I'm actually currently now on the $200 a month plan. I think it's worth it. I will say that it also, for me personally, it forces me to be a little bit more addicted to using it. Like I want to
Yeah.
get my money's worth. And so there's a tool called CC Usage, which was originally just for the API, but now it'll just give you your usage patterns, even if you're on the subscription plan. I will say like my usage yesterday if it was by API, would have been $105. So over a course of a month, if I was actually consistent, I'd be spending over $3,000 a month off of API credits, which is just not sustainable, right? So
Yeah, there might be
yeah,
people out there listening who think, you know what, Matt is actually crazy because $200 a month to some random AI thing when I'm a developer is insane. But if you had somebody who worked for you,
yeah,
who you could give detailed instruction to and have some reasonable expectation that they can get it done independently, and you said, well, that person you hired is $200 a month, that would be insane, right? And this, you can really turn this thing loose and get a lot done. But I think one of the mind shifts, at least I had to make, was if I'm going to pay for one of these AIs at a level like that, you better make use of it, and you better have a
yes.
plan that like this is how I'm going to take advantage of it. But when you do, all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is actually a bargain.
Yeah. Well, and let's compare it to like another like AI tool that I use, which is Descript. And I use Descript quite a bit. Descript is for creating you just record video and then you can edit off of the transcript and it'll
It's
like edit the
insane.
video. It's not perfect, but it's very, very good. And I'm on like I don't know, it's like $150 a year or something like that. I use it a lot for I run like my teams are remote and distributed, and I like to record videos just so they can hear from me like in 5 to 10 minute increments of like, here's what I'm thinking about, or shout outs or whatever it is, right? So I use it like quite a bit internally. But like if I don't use it for a week because I'm traveling, I don't feel bad about it. Um, and so like, but that's $150 a year. Like I get enough usage out of it at $150 a year that if I don't use it for a week, it's not that big of a deal. $200 a month is like a really high bar. And so my bet there was just like with the $20 a month plan was, if I don't use this enough, I'm going to cancel it. And the other bet is I think eventually that the open weighted models are going to get really interesting here. And so I just want to be on the edge of seeing this ahead of time. And so I look at it as a little bit of an investment in my own learning. Um, and so like to me, there's just no replacing hands-on time with the tools, right? And so that to me is really what this is about. And to be
Yeah.
fair, like I've used other tools, other APIs, developer tools where I paid for them. Actually, like browser base, which is like a web scraping tool, is awesome. I have paid $40 a month here and there to use it. And then when I don't use it enough, I will just downgrade my plan. And you kind of have your short list of things that you're using as a developer as a time, as opposed to thinking that it is like a indefinitely, I'm going to be paying for this.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think it's important for people to maybe not try the $200 plan, but like the $20 plan or something if they're interested in these things. Because it's downloading a free model that runs on your local machine at 3 billion parameters and saying, well, I tried AI and it doesn't work, is not the same as trying this type of thing, right?
Right.
It's really, really different.
Yeah. Well,
So
I also think it's, if you have I think that's why my situation, let's maybe like set up a little framing of who I think this is most valuable for. If you're like an elite developer and you're working on things like embedded systems or things that absolutely cannot break, I actually think there is less value for you here. I think the read only mode is valuable in that, like, analyze my C code. Where could there be like, like memory, buffer overflow attacks or whatever it is, right? But I think if you are building like side projects, like I'm not trying to like monetize like Plushcap really, but like, maybe someday I will. I just really love building Plushcap. Like, I think if you have a side project, and for you, like you're building courses, you have your website, like there's a lot there that if you just had more bandwidth, you could build so much more cool stuff. Like,
yeah,
like when you have a
yeah,
backlog of ideas and you don't have time to build them, that's actually where I think these tools are most valuable, because you can build a lot of those ideas, and some of those ideas might be stupid, and then you can just throw them away. But the ones that if you can just clear your backlog and come up with new ideas, because this thing is just, you're able to ship so much faster, even if you have to refactor by hand, that's amazing.
yeah. I have 3 projects that are like sort of side project-ish, but are like related to Talk Python in various ways. And yeah, it's just turn this stuff loose on it and see if it's a good idea. Who knows if it'll see the light of day, but it goes from, can I dedicate 3 months to that, to, well, let me try an afternoon.
Yeah.
And see
Well,
how it comes out,
let me show you like something that I built purely off of like Claude Code. If you go to Plushcap, I have a leaderboard of YouTube channels by company. So you've got, I actually have, all almost 500 companies in there, but it cuts off at 1,000. So yeah, if you go to leaderboards, YouTube, there's 231 companies listed here, and all 231 are have over 1,000 subscribers. Now, the thing that's interesting, I was just showing this to someone, and they're like, "Oh, it'd be really interesting is like you have like subscribers, you've got videos, you've got views, and if you click into like views, like if you click into the number of views, this is total views over time. It's a visualization of like, how many views OpenAI has on their YouTube channel over time." They were like, "What would this look like?" Because they're producing more and more videos, so is the average number of views going up over time or down? Like, are they becoming more efficient or less efficient? So I was like, I wonder, like, I already have subscribers, videos, and views. I have the visualization. I literally have the pattern for what I would like this to be. And yeah, There. Now you can see actually they're becoming less efficient over time as they add more videos. And there's different ways you can slice this data. So I've actually got like a bunch more ideas just from creating this view. But this view was based off of the pattern that I had already created. And so it was just basically like using the Django ORM to pull the data, create a new web page, and I could tell whether it was correct or not, and then like tweak it. So it had the pattern, and it just needed to mimic that in a way that was a new view and visualization. And I feel like that's
pull
what
new
this is
data,
super
make a new
powerful. Yeah.
page, but it's pretty much the same. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. So this isn't like rocket science or anything like that, but for me, like I wanted to build this view. I actually the interesting part about the story is like I talked to somebody in the morning, and I shipped this like when I had a quick break, and I was like I sent it over to them, and I was like, hey, I built this thing. And actually, no, it was my boss at work at DigitalOcean. He was like, because we're looking at our YouTube channel, and he's like, I wonder what the average views are over time. And I was like, a few hours later, I was like, I had a break, I shipped it. And he was like, this is crazy. Because we use, we use this data as a part of running my org, like Deborah and stuff. So it's
absolutely
helpful because whenever we have an idea, we're like, what does the data look like? Or what, especially when you compare it across companies, that's really helpful.
Yeah, it's the perfect type of thing. I absolutely love it. So let's close this out. We got maybe take a few more minutes, and let's give people some concrete tips. Like for example, when we talked about Git, check in often, let it finish a job, save it, and check that in.
Yeah,
and don't let it just go wild for a while, because if it goes bonkers and you're like, oh, I hate that, you're like, but that's also hours of work that's gone. You know what I mean? Like use source control as a sort of a save along the way there. You've got a bunch of tips and stuff that you give us
tips. Yeah.
Yes, I know.
Okay. Number one thing, I actually feel like I can I have better clarity around technical debt and how important it is to get rid of technical debt now. Because if if you're using like an agent and it like is looking to pattern match to what you have in your code base, and it finds the area that is like basically technical debt, and it copies that, and you don't, like you're not really on top of looking through the code, it will often copy design patterns that you really do not want in your code base. And so I actually feel like it allows you to make the argument that cleaning up technical debt is more important when you use LLMs and agents than when you were doing things by hand, where you knew as a developer, I'm just going to ignore that section of the code and I'm not going to use it. So that's like a very specific tip, which is like, if you are going to pattern match against something you're doing in your code base, make sure it's not copying the area that is a problem and then just like shipping that. I think that's one really
you don't want to supercharge your bad habits.
Yeah.
I would say on top of this, you absolutely do want to clean up technical debt. You can, when it's done, say, great work, that's valid, but now please apply some dry principles and some design patterns that that we're already using, and just polish this up one more time, and you'll get pretty good results. On the other side is, if you've got a project that's got a ton of technical debt, you can kind of just have this conversation with the Agentic AI, say, help me understand, like, where are the long functions? Where is there too much coupling? Like, let's start breaking that down. And when it's in that mindset, it's pretty good at like addressing those problems.
Right. And that's the flip side of like the technical debt, is like, it should be easier arguably to clean up technical debt, because if you fix something, or you're asking the agent, like, be introspective, like, how could this be improved? What are the design patterns? And particularly, like, at least in Claude Code, there's like a plan mode. I use plan mode. It's like a shift tab. I use it all the time, because then it's going to just like tell you what it's going to do, not go and do it, not going to make any changes. And so I will ask it, like, how can I optimize these database queries? How can I simplify this code without oversimplifying, that type of thing? And that's actually really helpful for just identifying what changes actually should be made. Then I can make the decision: are you going to go ahead and implement those, or should I just go ahead and implement them because they're easy enough for me to make the changes myself?
Awesome. Next tip.
Yeah. So I feel like you've already talked a little bit about this. Like the context is really important and the prompting is important. I will say that like where I've failed in the past and I like was not happy with LLMs was like, I'd say something like, can you just write a bunch of unit tests for this thing? And
Hmm.
like, of course, it's not going to have enough. Like I'd give it the code that I want it to be testing. But now what I found is like, after I have it write some code, I will say like, okay, now write me like a few happy paths and I'll like evaluate the happy paths and then I'll be like, write the unhappy paths and I'll like look at those and how it's failing. And then I'm like, what are the edge cases? And so you just have to, even if you, like a lot of people are like, oh, here's how you write the perfect prompt. Like I actually really hate doing that because what if I wrote the perfect prompt and it still didn't give me what I wanted at the other side? I just
Then you
tend
have to tell it it's going to go to jail, please, you know?
no, I just tend to be really incremental. I'm like really specific. Like just like again, going back to like that junior developer mentality, it's like just write me like 3 happy path tests to test this function.
Yeah.
Like give me some inputs and the expected outputs. Okay, now I want you to write the things that like basically would break it and make sure that it doesn't break. So what that does is like rather than I have not found success or it's been a lot harder with like write me a bunch of tests, both happy path and unhappy path. And then it's kind of, you know,
Yeah.
depending which model you're using or what day you get, like it may or may not be correct. And so
Yeah.
it's also think about like for yourself and your own sanity when you're reviewing the changes that it's making. You really want it to just like be consumable. Like, okay, those are the happy path. And mentally, you're like, okay, happy path tests, or mentally not that. You should, if you instruct it in the way that you want to consume the information that it's created out the other side, that can actually be really helpful as well.
Yeah, I find it's terrible if you just this project needs tests, write tests. It ends up testing like just the smallest arbitrary aspects of the code, and you're like, what is this? Like now I got to maintain this junk that like 1 + 1
Yeah.
is 2. Like no, this is not what I want from you, right? You got to be really specific and do bite size, and it's a little bit of the plan too. Like maybe plan out like the types of tests we should have. Okay, let's do this first one and focus. You know, like really guide it a little bit. Treat it like it's a junior that's kind of new to this stuff. Don't just you wouldn't tell the
Yeah.
junior like we need to refactor the architecture. I'll see you next week. You're like, whoa, what are you gonna get back? You don't know.
Yeah. Well, maybe like 3 quick like lightning round tips.
Yeah, do it.
One of them, mostly just I thought about because I have been doing this for years. Where if I'm working on different projects or different part of the code base, like I will just use different terminal backgrounds, different colors. This is my blue terminal. This is my so like blue is like where I've got Tmux and Vim and I'm like running a bunch of stuff. Exactly. And then yeah, I think my colleague Amit tweeted about this. It's like, and then black will be I'm running the server, I'm running my task queue, all the stuff that is like running right now, local development. Then if I'm like tailing a bunch of logs on the server, like that'll be in another different color. So just
Does this
mentally,
happen automatically?
no, I actually just open up separate terminals.
Gotcha,
And then
gotcha.
within that, I'll have different TMUX sessions running where I can just be like, again, has nothing to do with the computer. It has everything to do with me. A lot of times just doing a ton of context switching. So
Yeah,
I've found this
yeah,
to be applicable as a pattern for the agents. If I'm having an agent that works primarily on one part of the code base, then I will just like have that be blue. And then another part of the code base have it be black, right? So again, like I also, this maybe goes right into the second tip, which is a lot of people are like still microservices versus monolith. Like I actually think that the perfect design pattern right now for a lot of projects is like much closer to monolith, but like you split it up into like based off of the number of agents that you want to run. So like for me, I've got like my web scraping and like data collection stuff. And like I generally just want like 1, maybe 2 agents. So like that is like a separate project. And then it interfaces with everything else through APIs, like actual like web APIs. And so like that is actually how I've architected things where I'm like, how many developers, agents do I want working on the code base at once? Like what is my actual capacity to review the code? As a
yeah.
single developer, there's only so much capacity that I have. And so I will actually architect, or I've started to architect around that. But that doesn't mean I have 1,000 microservices. It typically means that I split the architecture into like 3 or 4 components, maybe 2 beyond the main application. And that helps me to just feel like I'm being productive without being overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's also good advice just for working in small teams anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
but
And so it's like a little
just
bit
some
more
of
of
the
like a
teams are
pragmatic.
automating, right? It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like a pragmatic, like I'm not doing crazy microservices. I'm not also doing like monolith everything, right? So I think that to me helped just kind of be a little bit more pragmatic about things.
Yeah, I wonder if you could automate, if you could AI agentic code some form of automatic color profile selecting. I mean,
Yeah. Um,
they go pretty good on bash scripts. I mean, it's possible.
I've one last tip, which kind of bit me. Luckily, I'm running Sentry. Shout out to the Sentry team for Plushcap, and I caught this bug. And a lot of times I'm like finding bugs, like oh, it's a 500 error or whatever. Not the end of the world. Like I go and fix it. I have definitely written more bugs myself by hand. Uh, Now that I have a mixed sort of like toolkit. Like I've just it's just something to like be
Yeah.
mindful of, which is like I'm so used to having like bits and pieces written by an agent and then I review it that when I'm writing code, I have like it's almost like overconfidence. Like, oh, I review a lot of code. I actually almost feel like the agent should be reviewing the code that I'm writing by hand. And so I'll just say like that's one thing that I feel like is a big tip for developers and might bite a lot of people as they spend somewhat less time writing code, especially like low level kind of like rote detail kind of stuff. And then they are like, oh, I'll go do that real quick. And then they suddenly like introduce a bug and they're like, oh, geez, I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it bit me.
Haven't done this like
Yeah.
by hand with the clickety click for a while.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I think that we need to embrace and be mindful, like you're saying, a certain level of like student mind when we're doing this kind of stuff. I mean, you say you've been using Claude Code for like 6 months, and these are starting to show up. Like imagine 10 years down the line. You
Right.
know what I mean? It could be seriously an issue.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did help one person do a bunch of agentic coding, and I won't name it because I'm not sure they want to be named, but they really were like, wow, this is incredible. And the thing that surprises me, they said, was as it's going through maybe 30 or 40 things it does to process a request, it's explaining why it's doing it. It says, okay, I need to make sure that this runs in this way. So let's do this like Django, this manage py command or something like that, right? And they're like, if I'm paying attention, I'm actually learning new things about how this is supposed to be done.
Yeah.
And in the end, it says, here's why I made these changes. I think it's so easy to just go, great, next. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if we just slow down a little bit and use
You can
those
learn a lot
opportunities to
from it.
learn, you learn. I've learned a
Ask it.
ton.
Like
Yeah.
I can just hit escape and I'm like, tell me why you're doing that. I'm not really sure why you're doing that. And it'll explain it. And then you can it's the back and forth. I mean, it is like having the conversation about code that you often can't have with another developer. It's like really expensive to take your whole team's time to talk through
Yeah.
some change to the code base. You can have all those conversations. And I personally find, as like someone who is relatively introverted, it is not taxing on me to just have that conversation with the computer. So I can still have all the conversations with the humans and not be drained by the conversation with the computer.
Yeah, that's awesome. And think of the opportunity for people who either are sole developers or they live in places where they can't go to user group meetup type things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
really
they're
cool.
like busy in meetings all day and they still want to be a productive developer and be hands-on with this stuff and not, I think a big part of it is like not getting caught up too much with the whole hype cycle. I am firmly in the camp that like, this is, while this is a shift, it is not that big of a shift compared to like when they said, oh, software developers are going to go away because we have COBOL. Software developers are going to go away because we have code generation off UML diagrams. Software developers are going to go away because of low code, no code. I get the sense, having used these tools, that a lot of companies will use them in the wrong way of thinking they can just replace developers. And actually what they're doing is they're building up a massive amount of technical debt and they're going to need software developers to fix it.
Yeah.
So I think it's building further layers of abstraction and more code.
I think that you and I and everyone else out there who is very competent coders pre-AI, we're going to be a little bit like COBOL programmers, I think. There's going to be places that are just like, look, we've just got to call some people that know how to write code and figure this out. Like this stuff,
The
we're going to
crazy
need some
analogy, the crazy analogy is like, okay, this is what I've read one, like, so that like the U-boats during German U-boats during World War One have like they have steel in them that is or it's not been affected by like the nuclear bombs that were set off around, during and after World War Two. So like they will extract the steel from those because they're not affected by the
Wow.
radiation. I guess we're like the old U-boats. They're going to extract us
Yes.
from retirement and be like, you still know how to program
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
esoteric language. The LLMs can't do it. I don't know. Maybe that's
Okay,
what's
take the
gonna
mothballs out. That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and we're going back into service. It's an interesting time, and there's a lot of opportunity as you pointed out. So I want to leave people with a message of don't be scared, embrace this, see what it can do for you. There's a lot of opportunity here. But Matt, you get the final word.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's like the same philosophy we started with, which is like, I don't see this as that big of a shift compared to like a lot of the other stuff that's happened in the industry. Like I would just learn these things, and frankly, like then you are empowered to say like, I'm not going to use that because you've tried it. And so like then you have an informed opinion on it. And I think that's really what matters as a software developer, is not to just like dismiss something simply because it seems like a hype cycle, but actually just to try it. And if it doesn't work, I mean, you're like, well, I have an informed opinion. I will say though, this is actually rapidly evolving. And as we've talked about through our conversation, I would actually try this multiple times over several months, because it does get better, and it does change with the tools. And so it's not just like I tried it once and I'm going to toss it away. I would give it a try every few months and see if it works for kind of clicks for you,
Yeah.
and kind of works for your use case.
Yeah, if we had this conversation pre-agentic code agents, could be very, very different. But
Right.
6 months later,
And
look,
it's just like when open source was like nascent. Oh, I tried open source once. If you haven't tried it in 15 years, like I don't know what to say, right? I think it's a similar thing, but it's just a little bit faster evolution. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy times. I mean, I'm honestly thinking maybe we should ship this episode like this week with a recording, not the 2 weeks out that it's scheduled to be recording, because who knows what's going to happen. No, just kidding. But they are changing fast. Well, thanks for coming back on the show. Always great to catch up with you.
Thanks, Michael. It's been great.
Yeah. Bye.